Well, go ahead and open your Bibles now to chapter 19 of Proverbs, Proverbs 19, and we're going to begin our study in verse 3. Whenever you read a portion of God's Word, if you're a preacher, what happens to you is you do what Brother Tom Holland used to call is the homiletic habit. Now, I don't know if y'all know what that means but you're always looking for the next sermon. Always trying to think about what you could preach on from God's Word. And the old idea, the phrase is, you preach from the overflow. You study, you learn, and then you preach from it. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm having a real hard time going through the book of Proverbs, not wanting to preach on just about every other verse because there's such great concepts found there. But last night I was reading, and I wanted to read through the book again and see how far I could go. And I want you to go with me to chapter 1 for just a second. Keep your finger there at chapter 19. But go back with me to chapter 1. And let's pick up with verse 1 and read through verse 6. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. And here's where I really want to concentrate. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel, to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. You go back there and you read that again and you realize Solomon's saying these verses, these proverbs are given to take the young man who really knows very little and provide him the instruction that he needs to function properly as God would have him to do in life. But what about those who have been around a little bit longer, the wise? Well, he's going to hear and increase in learning. There's always something there for us that will help us be more intelligent, more wise, more knowledgeable, and to be able to interpret these proverbs, these enigmas, these difficulties of life. Well, as I'm studying through the book of Proverbs, I understand there's some passages here that, you may have read them before, but then when you take them and compare them with what Solomon says in other passages, you say, I think I'm seeing now something I did not see before, a lesson that is to be learned. Well, let's begin with verse 3 and see what Solomon says here. The foolishness of a man twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. Now, I think there are some translations which make this a little clearer, but the idea of frets is more that he rages here. This word frets in the original word means to rage, to be angry at. The foolishness of a man twists his way. What do you mean twist? If I'm going in the wrong direction, why am I going in the wrong direction? Maybe that I don't know where I'm going. It may be that I'm following whatever pleases me. He says the foolishness of a man twists his way. When he arrives at the end of his foolishness, whose fault is it? It's his fault. But whom do we generally blame for the difficulties we're having in life? Everybody except ourselves, but ultimately who do we end up blaming? We end up blaming God. We rage against God. Why did you do this to me? When in reality, God didn't do it to us. Who did it to us? We did. It's the choices that we make. Let me offer you some passages which I think are helpful here. We rarely study the book of Lamentations, but Lamentations 3, verses 39 through 41. Well, I can't write on the edge of the margin there. It says, why should a living man complain, a man for the punishment of his sins? Let us search out and examine our ways and turn back to the Lord. Let us lift our hearts and our hands to God in heaven. Why should we complain when we look and see what we're going through and say, Lord, why did you put me here? Well, Lord didn't put me here. I put myself here. The choices that I made, and that was their case in the book of Lamentations. The book of Ezekiel, in chapter 18 and verse 29. Yet the house of Israel says, the way of the Lord is not fair. O house of Israel, is it not my ways which are fair and your ways which are not fair? If you think about the children of Israel who are by the river Kibar for the being exiled there, why are they there? Because they disobeyed God. And God is punishing them so that it will make them a better people. And they are saying, the Lord wasn't fair with us. The Lord not only has been fair, He's been more than fair. What do you mean more than fair? Because not only did He punish us less than our sins deserve, but He gave us an opportunity to try to make some changes in our life. How often do we find ourselves blaming God for our situation in life? And if we want to improve it, can we improve our situation in life? Absolutely we can. It requires different choices. A lot of times you'll talk with people and you'll say, if you want things to improve, you've got to make some different choices. And someone says, but I don't want to do that. What is the definition of stupidity? You expect a different result by doing the same thing over and over again. If you stick your finger into a light socket and you get shocked, and you say, I don't like that. But then you stick your finger in a light socket again, you get shocked. And think, well, when's it going to quit shocking me? When I quit sticking my finger in the light socket. And the way of a man, the foolishness of a man twists his way. It's my own foolishness that's twisting my way, and yet that man is raging or fretting, if you will, against the Lord. I think that there's a whole lot in that maybe we ought to step back and say, if things are not going right, who's got to change? And what have we got to do to make things right? Verse 4. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend. Now, Solomon has addressed the subject of wealth numerous times. Why do you suppose Solomon focuses on wealth so often? Okay, I would say he was among the most wealthy, if not the wealthiest man in the world in his time. I mean, gold and silver in such abundance that anything else didn't really even, you don't even count it because it's not that important. But how you use it, how you view it. Okay? It'll take off and leave you in a moment's notice. Let me offer some passages which I think are helpful in seeing this. Go back to chapter 8 and verse 18. And there Solomon says, riches and honor are with me, enduring riches and righteousness. Enduring riches. Did Solomon see the difference between material wealth and spiritual wealth. Yes, he did. You know, so often in life you can be poor physically and rich spiritually. That's what the church at Smyrna was. He says, I know your poverty, but you are rich. It's also possible to be rich materially and poor spiritually. You remember the rich man who had so much? He said, I'm going to tear down my barns, build bigger barns, and, take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And remember what God said about him? You're a fool. Yeah. Tonight your soul will be required of thee. And then whose will those things be that you prepared? All this stuff you lived for, you can't take it with you. That's not enduring riches. Solomon understood the difference between these. But when you look at this passage, he says, wealth makes many friends. What kind of friends are those? Fair weather friends. Can you tell me of a young man who had a bunch of those? Prodigal son, Luke chapter 15, verses 13 through 15. He had all those people who went with him as long as he had money, but when he ran out of money, what happened? He ran out of friends. When he ran out of money, he ran out of friends. They were not real friends to him. Now, he says something in the latter part of this verse, which is also valuable. He says, the poor is separated from his friend. I think he's talking about the fact that there's sometimes when poverty comes along, people will abandon you. And they will, and rather than addressing at this point, we're going to get to verses 6 and 7 in just a moment. And those verses will also focus on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to verse 5. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies will not escape. Now, Solomon also focuses on the idea of a witness. Now, what is a witness? Somebody who's observed something. You may have heard it. You may have seen it with your eyes, but it's, firsthand to you. And when someone comes along and says, did Ray say this? And what if I say, yes, he said it, and I don't know where he did or not. I just made it up. Surely nobody ever makes anything up. Surely nobody would ever repeat gossip or a rumor that they've heard. You know how rumors start, don't you? No, it starts before they ever get there. Somebody's told a lie. And lie begins where? In the heart. Someone has already decided in their heart that they're going to misrepresent you to others. They told a lie. Now, a witness is a person who claims to have heard something, claimed to have seen something, and they didn't see it and they didn't hear it. They're a false witness. It's the imaginations of their own heart. I think about poor old Nehemiah trying to build those walls while Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem are trying to say, you're really just trying to rebel against the king. He says, no, you've made this up in your own heart. I'm not going to do that. That would have been all on Facebook. Just those boys have been wearing it out. Well, in this case here, he's talking about lying. In chapter 14 and verse 25, let me put that in there, a false or true witness delivers soul, but a deceitful witness speaks lies. And back in verse 5, that should have been there. It says, a faithful witness does not lie, but a false witness will utter lies. This is one of the 7 things that are an abomination to the Lord in Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19. A false witness and one who utters lies. This is also going to be restated again in verse 9. Solomon's going to repeat some of these things 2 or 3 times in this chapter because he's wanting to drive home some very important points. Okay, let's look now at verses 6 and 7. These verses go together. Many entreat the favor of nobility, and every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. All the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He may pursue them with words, yet they will abandon him. Now, let's go back to verse 6 here. Many entreat the favor of nobility. First of all, you got to understand, what is nobility? What's that? A ruler? We tend to think it in our country because we elect our officials. But if you go to most countries, what kind of rulership do they have? Some sort of monarch, a king or a queen. And what about the family of those people? They're considered to be what? Nobility. People of royal descent. Now, why would you seek the favor of nobility? What they can do for you. You know, the old phrase, I got friends in high places. You know, people who can get things done for you. They're the movers and they're the shakers. There's a couple of chapter and verses I think are valuable. Chapter 29 and verse 26 says, many seek the ruler's favor, but justice for a man comes from the Lord. And then in chapter 18 and verse 16, it says, a man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men. Now, if you are a ruler and somebody comes to you and asks you to do something for them, are they not treating you exactly like the person who goes to a rich man? Rich man has many friends. What happens to the person who was once the ruler and now he's no longer the ruler? How many people go to him? I don't go to him anymore. Why not? He can't do anything for you. He's not in a position of power anymore. And because of that, but he says, many entreat the favor of nobility. And if you'll notice the latter part of that, which you really understand, every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. As long as somebody's handing out favors, handing out gifts, everybody's going to stand in line and say, hey, I'm your friend. Adopt me, take me in, let me be a part of your. But these are the same fair weather friends that he talked about earlier. And then when you take verse 7 with that, he said, all the brothers of the poor hate him. What kind of respect does a poor man get? Why does he not get any respect? If he can't do anything for me, then why do I need him? But the truth is, we shouldn't be thinking like that, should we? Do you remember what James said in James chapter 2? He talks about if there comes into your assembly a man who is clothed in fine apparel, and you say, sit here in this good place, and there comes in a poor man, he's in tattered clothes, and you say, you stand there or sit here at my footstool. He said, you become judges with evil thoughts. And then you have to ask the question is, what is the motivation behind the man who seeks to be the friend of nobility, who seeks the friend of the wealthy? He's wanting something. He is selfish. That's really the bottom line of it, isn't it? Is when people are seeking somebody who can do something for them or give them something, it's nothing more than selfishness. And there's one more passage which I think is helpful here. In chapter 14 and verse 20, He says, the poor man is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. I think Solomon's trying to tell his son Rehoboam, don't look at poor people and look down upon them. Don't disrespect them. And I will tell you, it's been my observation that if you want somebody to be generous, who's going to be generous? The poor man. You know, the widow who gave her 2 mites, Luke chapter 21, that's the background of the study of what we're studying on Sunday morning. You know, everybody's looking at people pouring all their money in, and the Lord says they're giving out of their abundance. But what's she giving? All that she has. It's been my observation that the poorest of people are among the most generous. I don't know how many of you noticed things, but last week I was noticing some people who were dropping off gifts for families that were in need. And they were showing people stopping by and unloading their gifts. And then they were showing the people stopping by receiving the gifts. Do you know what I observed? The people who were dropping off the gifts were driving older cars than the people who were picking up the gifts. I mean, you know, most people would not even notice that, but I just noticed, you know, here's the people who probably are struggling to give, are giving to people who are desirous to receive. And I'm not saying they're all that way. I don't want to be making a judgment of all people, but I'm observe that it's generally the people who are the less capable are often the ones who are the greatest givers among this. Okay, let's go to verse 8. This is an interesting verse. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. He who keeps understanding will find good. What's the principle of this passage? Seek wisdom. Okay. Benefits the bearer. Do you want a good investment that pays off? You know, this is the time of year when people often will start planning for their new year about here's where we're going to invest some here. You know what's the best investment that you can invest in? I can tell you. Your soul. Remember Matthew chapter 6, verse 25? Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt, thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. The best investment you can make is a heavenly investment. But then you start saying, well, if that's true, what's the best investment for me here on earth? Get wisdom, keep understanding. That's going to derive for you the greatest good. Well, I won't make me the most money. That's not what I said. But what it will do, it will teach you that you love your own soul. You love who you can be, and you will find good from that. There will be benefit from. You want to find real happiness, real joy? Be a faithful Christian. And it's there. Let me offer a couple of other passages. There's some that I just found really helpful here. In chapter 8, in verses 35 and 36, for whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord, but he who sins against me wrongs his own soul, and all those who hate me love death. Or Proverbs chapter 4, in verse 4 and verse 6, he said, he also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words, keep my commandments, and live. Verse 6, do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you. When I read this, he who loves wisdom loves his own soul. Are we supposed to love ourselves? Yes. Because the Bible teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves. So if I don't love myself, how can I love my neighbor? But if I love myself properly, it says that I ought to get what is in my best interest. And what is in my best interest is to get wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and keep these things in our lives. Verse 9, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. We've already talked about that in verse 5. I think, again, the idea of the false witness is a person who claims to have observed something they have not observed. They will be punished for it. The one who speaks lies will perish. We often call this perjury. Perjury is self-defeating. And I think when you put that with verse 8, you want to benefit yourself, what do? Seek wisdom. Keep understanding. You want to hurt yourself? Tell a lie. Be deceitful. And it will not bring you what you want it to bring. Now, let's go to verse 10. Verse 10 is interesting in the way that it puts it. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. Now, what do you mean when you talk about luxury? Riches? Comfort? I think whenever I hear the word luxurious or luxury, I think about what they say, oh, this is such luxurious furniture. It's it's what the rich people would sit on. It's what they would eat, the table they would eat at. You hear about luxury vehicles. That may be those that cost a whole lot of money to purchase. And Solomon frequently contrasts things that do not fit together. Jesus did that too. You remember he said in Matthew 7 and verse 6, do not cast your pearls before swine. Why would you not want to cast pearl before swine? They're going to trample again. They're going to turn again and tear you, rend you. They don't appreciate what they are. They may be thinking you're throwing food out for them. You throw pearls out for them. They just think, what are you giving me? I can't eat this. I can't use this. And when you start comparing things that don't fit together, he said luxury is not fitting for a fool. Why wouldn't it be fitting for a fool? Okay, I wouldn't say destructive nature because Solomon enjoyed luxury. Okay, they'll waste it. Just like, you remember the prodigal son did. All of that he had, how long did it last? Not long. We'd say he blew it. And then after he did, then he was in want. Luxury and a fool just does not go together. And let me offer you some others, which I think are helpful here. Chapter 17 and verse 7. Excellent speech is not becoming for a fool or to a fool, much less lying lips to a prince. Chapter 26 and verse 1. As snow in summer and rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Here's a man who really doesn't deserve to be able to have this. And I started saying, well, how could I find an apt illustration of this? How many of you have ever noticed people who win the lottery? Don't have a whole lot of money, and all of a sudden they win the lottery. Do you know that the majority of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years? How can you go bankrupt and win $30 million? First of all, They thought they could get something for nothing, and they got something, when in reality they got nothing, because it's gone, and it's gone quickly. I always call gambling the tax on stupid people. They're not able to do math, and they can't reason properly. Luxury is not fitting for a fool. He doesn't know how to handle what he's been given. And the same thing I'd say applies, even though it's a little different. What happens to many of these pro athletes who were raised real poor, and then all of a sudden, the day they sign with their professional teams, they're multimillionaires? You know what happens to most of them? Wind up broke, because they can't control their spending once they're put in positions like that. But I would suggest to you that there's probably a lot more in this verse than just that. Because he says much less. Now that's a term of comparison, just like he had said, it's better for this, better for that. Well, he's saying much less for a servant to rule over princes. Does it make sense for a man who is a servant to be the head over princes? That doesn't fit. But I want you to go with me to 1 Kings chapter 11, and I'm just going to look at verses 26 through 28. 1 Kings 11, 26 through 28. And this is where it fits. Then Solomon's servant, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zerata, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. This is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Millo and repaired the damages to the city of David his father. The man Rehoboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. Now, this is Solomon's servant, Jeroboam. And he is a servant. And he puts him in a position of power. What happens to Jeroboam? This man, y'all know what happens to him, don't you? He becomes the king over the northern 10 tribes. You remember Rehoboam, Solomon's son, is only going to end up with the 2 southern tribes. And here's a man who was a servant who's going to end up ruling over princes. Maybe this is prophetic. Saying, luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. And guess what's going to happen? One of Solomon's own servants is going to end up ruling over the majority of the kingdom. Now, what kind of ruler does he become? He becomes the one that they all look back to and say, because he followed in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, because he set up an altar at Bethel, he set up an altar at Dan, and he told the children of Israel, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem to worship God. Here's your gods that led you out of Egypt, O Israel. It's not fitting because he does not appreciate who he is and where he's at. And I think there's perhaps a lesson in that for us, is that we need to be careful that we are not the kind of people who are out of our element, going in the wrong direction. Okay, let's go to verse 11. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. Now, slow to anger and overlook a transgression. Has Solomon talked about anger previously? Yes, he has. Chapter 14 and verse 29. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Chapter 16 and verse 32. It says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Now, following this in chapter 20 and verse 3 will be, it is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. Solomon is trying to say here, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. If I am smart, I'm going to use that word. Solomon doesn't use that word smart, but that's a 21st century word. If I'm smart, I will be slow to anger. What happens when people get involved in road rage? Somebody's going to get hurt. Because if you are angry and then you provoke that person who made you angry, guess what's going to happen? He's going to get even more angry. Guess what's going to happen? He's going to provoke you. And then guess what's going to happen pretty soon? Somebody's going to be pulling a gun out, shooting at somebody, or running somebody off the road, or causing an accident. Discretion says do what? Chill out. You know, don't let this get under your skin. And to go along with that, His glory is to overlook a transgression. Sometimes people consider it weakness not to respond to someone else in anger. It's not weakness, it's actually strength. It takes a whole lot more resolve on our part to not become angry, not to be vindictive, not to respond in kind. And I think he's trying to talk about here about how important it is for a person to be of self-control. That's really the key idea here, is self-control. How important is it for me to be careful what I say? Be careful what I do. And, you know, it's not easy to do that now. But when we find ourselves put in those situations, that's what he's trying to say. And what would this do in families if this were practiced? It would solve a tremendous amount of problems. What would happen in churches if this were practiced? You wouldn't have churches dividing over personalities and over something this person said to me. You wouldn't have somebody running off to another place because they don't like this person or like that person. What would it do in a country if people got to where they weren't trying to one-up somebody else? It'd be a lot stronger country. Okay, let's go ahead and take verse 12. The king's wrath is like a roaring lion, but his favor is like the dew on the grass. Now, I will tell you there's a whole lot more that goes along with this, but does it make sense to poke the bear? I mean, sometimes if you're out here and you're trying to aggravate somebody, it can come back to you. And here he talks about the king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion. If you make him angry, what can he do to you? I mean, he can make you dead. But his favor is like the dew on the grass. You know, it's a blessing. It's something good. It's something enjoyable. Well, I'm going to have to quickly put in here chapter 16, verses 14 and 15, where he says, as messengers of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. In the light of the king's face is life, and favor is like the cloud of latter rain. Chapter 20 and verse 2, the wrath of the king is like a roaring lion. Whoever provokes him to anger sins against his own life. And in chapter 28 And verse 15, like a roaring lion, like a charging bear, is a wicked ruler over a poor people. I guess that's where I stop.